The millionaire CEO thought he'd buried the past, until he saw three little girls in the park, and one wore the exact pearl necklace he once gave the woman he let go. Lucas Blake didn't believe in detours. His life was structured, efficient, forward-moving. He was a man of purpose, of plans measured in quarters and projections, not seasons or emotion. That afternoon, he was only passing through the park because his driver had to reroute due to unexpected construction near his office. It was warm for late summer, the kind of warmth that settled over the city in a golden hush. Lucas had stepped out to walk the last few blocks, phone in hand, already preparing mentally for the board meeting that awaited him. He wasn't supposed to look up. He wasn't supposed to stop. But something made him do both. Ahead of him, in a sun-dappled section of grass, three little girls played under a tree. Their laughter echoed across the path, light and unbothered. They couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. They were identical in every way: thick, shoulder-length brown hair, delicate features, bright blue eyes, and matching summer dresses with pale floral prints. One of them ran with a pink ribbon tied around her wrist, the others chasing close behind, their bare feet moving across the grass like they belonged there. Lucas would have kept walking, he'd seen children in the park before. But then he saw it. A flash of something familiar. It was a necklace. Not just any necklace. A delicate strand of pearls resting against the collarbone of one of the girls, the light catching it just right. His heart stopped. That necklace wasn't common. He had it made. Years ago. For someone he thought he'd never see again. He stepped closer, barely aware of himself moving. The girls didn't notice him. They had fallen into a circle in the grass, arranging flowers and talking to each other in that language only children fully understood. But the necklace, he could see it clearly now. A single strand of small pearls, ending in a gold clasp shaped like a crescent. It was hers. Skylar's. He remembered the way her eyes lit up when he had given it to her, the way she pressed it to her skin with trembling fingers and whispered that no one had ever given her something so delicate. He hadn't seen Skylar in 5 years. His mind raced, connecting images, emotions, timelines. She had always joked about wanting a big family, laughing that maybe the universe would surprise her with triplets just to test her patience. He had laughed too, back then, when they were still dreaming of futures not yet written. But he had left that dream behind when his career offered him a one-way ticket to everything he thought he wanted. He had walked away from her. And now here he was, standing in the middle of a park, watching 3 little girls with Skylar's eyes, and one of them was wearing the necklace he thought had been lost to time. Before he could gather his thoughts, a woman walked past with a stroller and paused near him. She followed his gaze and said, "Those 3. They're Skylar Hart's girls. Sweetest kids in the neighborhood." Lucas turned to her slowly, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Skylar. Here. Not in another city or country like he had imagined. Not lost to some version of the past. He asked where she was now. The woman pointed to a shaded bench near the edge of the park. Probably just over there. She comes here almost every afternoon. Lucas followed the direction of her hand. His pulse quickened. He spotted her instantly. Skylar. Sitting alone, legs crossed, a book resting open in her lap. Her hair was tied back, longer than he remembered, but it was her. The same calm presence, the same quiet strength. She turned a page, unaware of the man standing across the lawn, watching her with eyes that suddenly held 5 years of silence and 1,000 questions. He didn't move. He wasn't ready to speak. But the moment had already spoken for him. The necklace, the girls, the fact that she was here at all, it was too much to be a coincidence. For the first time in years, Lucas Blake didn't know what to do next. And yet, deep inside, something told him that whatever future he had been chasing meant nothing if he walked away from this moment. Lucas stood frozen on the path, the world around him continuing in gentle motion, children laughing, dogs tugging at their leashes, the murmur of people passing through the park. But to him, everything felt distant, like a dream suspended in air. His eyes remained locked on Skylar, trying to reconcile the woman sitting quietly on the bench with the memory he had been carrying for years. She hadn't seen him yet. She was flipping another page in her book, occasionally glancing up to check on the girls, whose laughter rang like wind chimes across the open field. It felt surreal, watching her in this calm, maternal scene while his thoughts spiraled with the weight of what he was seeing. For a moment, Lucas considered walking away. Maybe he could convince himself that he'd imagined the necklace, that the girls were someone else's. Maybe he could return to his office, bury himself in data and projections, and forget that he had ever seen this moment unfold. But even as the thought entered his mind, he knew it wasn't true. He couldn't walk away from this, not again. His heart beat faster as he stepped off the path and made his way toward her, trying to suppress the part of him that was screaming with guilt, confusion, and the sudden surge of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Skylar looked up when she sensed movement nearby, and the second their eyes met, the book in her hand slipped slightly, as if the weight of his presence knocked the breath from her. Her expression shifted in a heartbeat, shock, wariness, and then something unreadable settled behind her eyes. She closed the book gently, her fingers tightening slightly on the cover. Lucas approached slowly, not wanting to startle her, but the air between them was already charged with everything they hadn't said, with 5 years of silence that now collapsed in an instant. "I wasn't sure if it was you," he said quietly, his voice sounding foreign even to himself. "Until I saw the necklace." Skylar didn't speak right away. Her eyes flicked toward the girls, still playing, then returned to him. "You shouldn't be here," she said evenly, though there was no anger in her voice, only exhaustion, maybe even sadness. "But I guess you are." "I didn't know," he began, but she cut him off gently, almost as if she expected the words before he even said them. "Of course you didn't." That was the point. There was no spite in her tone, just a simple truth. Lucas felt it like a blow, a reminder that his decisions had shaped not just his life, but hers too. He sat down on the far end of the bench, giving her space, though the distance between them still felt like a canyon. "They're mine, aren't they?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Skylar exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing just a bit, as if holding up a weight for too long. "Yes. Cody, Clara, and Camille. They're 5. Lucas closed his eyes for a second. The timeline made perfect sense. He didn't need a DNA test or a long explanation. He knew. He felt it in his chest, in the way one of the girls had laughed exactly like Skylar once had, in the way their eyes matched his own reflection. But it wasn't just the biology. It was the realization that he had missed 5 entire years. First steps, first words, birthday candles and scraped knees. All of it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Skylar turned to look at him directly now, and her eyes held the kind of clarity that only comes from deep hurt healed by necessity. "Because I needed to protect them. You chose a different life, Lucas. You left. And I wasn't going to chase you down to prove something. I didn't want them to grow up hoping for someone who wouldn't stay." He felt the sting of those words cut through him, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He had chosen his career. Chosen success. Chosen everything but her. And now, sitting beside her in this quiet park, surrounded by echoes of the life he might have had, he was no longer sure what any of it had been worth. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said carefully. I saw them, and I couldn't pretend I didn't." Skylar studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, softly, she said, "I'm not angry anymore, Lucas. But you don't get to just walk back in and expect to be part of this." "I don't expect anything," he replied. "But I want to try. If you'll let me." She didn't say yes. But she didn't say no either. Instead, she looked back toward the girls, watching as one of them picked up a flower and tucked it behind her sister's ear. For the first time, Lucas followed her gaze with something other than regret. He felt something new stirring beneath the guilt, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. Quiet, fragile, and just beginning. The following day, Lucas couldn't concentrate. Not on the endless stream of emails waiting in his inbox, not during the investor call he had half-heartedly dialed into, and certainly not while reviewing projections for an upcoming acquisition. His thoughts returned over and over to that moment on the park bench, to the way Skylar had looked at him, not with hate, but with a distant protectiveness he hadn't earned. He replayed her words again and again, how calmly she had told him the truth, how she had shielded their children not out of revenge but out of something deeper. The idea that she had lived all these years raising 3 children alone, while he went on building an empire, was a truth that weighed on him like an anchor tied to his chest. At lunchtime, without even thinking, he cancelled his afternoon meetings and left the office. He didn't know exactly where he was going until he was already in his car, instructing the driver to take him back to the park. A part of him feared he wouldn't find them there again, that yesterday had been a one-time chance to see that world. But when he arrived, the girls were there, just as before, playing near the sandbox under the lazy shade of a tree. He didn't see Skylar at first. Instead, he saw Clara. He remembered her name now, carefully stacking plastic cups with her sisters, and something inside him clenched. It was too soon to approach, too much too fast. So he sat on a nearby bench, watching quietly from a respectful distance. 10 minutes passed before Skylar appeared, walking toward the girls with a tote bag slung over her shoulder. She was wearing sunglasses and had her hair up in a loose knot, but he knew it was her. She noticed him almost immediately. Their eyes met again, and for a second, neither of them moved. Then she turned toward the girls, calling out something light-hearted that made them squeal and run to her. Lucas remained seated, unsure if he had overstepped by coming back so soon. But then, after a few minutes, Skylar walked toward him. She stood beside the bench rather than sitting, arms folded loosely. "You came back," she said, and though it wasn't a question, her tone wasn't closed off. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted, rising to his feet. "I've been thinking about nothing else." Skylar studied him. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep much," he said honestly. "I've been trying to remember if I ever gave you the chance to tell me you were pregnant. And I think I didn't. I think I was already gone before you had the words." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she glanced toward the girls, who were now busy turning the sandbox into a castle. "I was going to tell you," she said finally. "But the last time we talked, you were already somewhere else. Physically, emotionally. You'd made your decision. I was scared, and I didn't want to be a problem you had to fix." "You never were a problem," Lucas said quietly. "But I know I made you feel like one." Skylar let out a breath, and for a moment, the weight between them felt slightly lighter. "I made peace with it a long time ago. The girls, my girls, they're my everything. I gave them everything I could. They never asked about their dad, not in the way I feared. They're happy, Lucas. I need you to know that." "I believe you," he said. "And I'm not here to disrupt that. I just want to know them. If there's any room in their world for me, even if I have to start as nothing more than a name they learn slowly." Skylar finally sat down beside him, though she kept her body angled toward the children. "They're smart. They'll sense it, the way you're showing up. They'll test you too. They've been hurt, even if they don't fully understand how. It's not about being a hero, Lucas. It's about being consistent." He nodded slowly. "Then that's what I'll be." For the first time, she didn't answer with words. She just gave a small, cautious nod and stood to return to the girls. Before leaving, she turned back and said, "We come here most afternoons after school. That's not an invitation. But it's not a warning either." Lucas understood. It was a beginning. A crack in the wall. And even though he didn't know what the next step looked like, he knew that he would be there. Every afternoon. Every moment she allowed. Because he was no longer running toward his future. He was standing still for the first time, ready to earn something real. By the end of the week, Lucas had returned to the park every single day. He didn't approach the girls directly, didn't impose or make bold declarations. He simply showed up, sat on the same bench, and quietly watched their world unfold. At first, Skylar kept her distance, keeping interactions brief and polite, but something shifted after the third day. When Lucas arrived and took his usual seat, she walked over and sat beside him without hesitation, a small thermos in hand, and offered him a cup of coffee. He accepted it with a nod of quiet gratitude, sensing that this tiny gesture carried more weight than any words either of them could offer at that moment. They talked, not about the past or the mistakes that had carved the years between them, but about small things, about the girls' favorite cartoons, about school supplies, about how Clara refused to wear matching socks and Camille was already trying to teach herself how to read chapter books. Slowly, Lucas began to piece together the intricate lives of his daughters, not through confrontation or confession, but through stories that Skylar shared with the quiet pride of someone who had raised 3 children on her own and asked nothing in return. On Friday, something unexpected happened. The girls, noticing that Lucas was there again, started drifting closer. It was Clara who approached him first, a flower crown she had made herself slightly askew on her head. She stood in front of him for a long moment, staring at him with a curious frown before asking if he knew how to whistle. He smiled and tried, failing miserably on the first attempt, which made her burst into giggles and call her sisters over. In a matter of minutes, all 3 girls were standing around him, handing him pebbles and dandelions, asking him questions faster than he could answer them. Skylar watched from a few steps away, her arms folded tightly, but her expression was soft, not tense. She didn't intervene. She didn't call the girls back. And Lucas felt something shift deep in his chest as he sat cross-legged in the grass, suddenly surrounded by bright voices and little hands tugging on his sleeves. For the first time in years, he wasn't wearing a watch. He had no phone in hand. No sense of time passing. Only the overwhelming awareness that this was what he had been missing without even realizing it. Later that afternoon, after the girls had returned to their sandbox fortress, Skylar sat beside him again. "You're good with them," she said, her voice low, almost surprised. Lucas shrugged, unsure what to say. "I'm trying not to mess it up." "They're not fragile," she said. "But they're guarded. If you hurt them, I won't protect you from what that does to them." He looked at her, not defensive, just honest. "I'm not going to hurt them. I won't leave." Skylar nodded, but she didn't smile. Trust, he realized, wasn't built in promises. It was built in proof. And so he kept coming. Day after day. Some days the girls ran to him, eager to show him what they had drawn or built. Other days, they stayed back, watching him like scientists studying a new element. He let them set the pace. He never pushed. When Camille fell and scraped her knee, he waited until she reached for him before lifting her into his lap. When Cody forgot the word for umbrella during a story, Lucas waited patiently while she figured it out on her own. He didn't try to replace anything. He didn't pretend to be a father they had always known. He simply remained, present, calm, dependable. And slowly, the walls they had built around their tiny world started to let him in. It was late one afternoon, as the sky turned golden and the park began to empty, when Clara leaned against his arm and asked, "Are you going to be here tomorrow too?" Lucas looked down at her, her face smudged with grass and dirt, and said quietly, "Yes. I'll be here as long as you want me to be." She didn't say anything, just nodded and rested her head against him like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that moment, Lucas felt something he had never experienced in all the boardrooms and private jets and glass towers. He felt found. Not by success. But by something far more real. Something he was finally beginning to understand had been waiting for him all along. Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected stillness in Lucas's apartment. The usual rush of his weekend, reviewing contracts, planning next week's investor briefings, managing silent obligations from people who only knew his title, was replaced by something gentler, quieter. He had awakened early without an alarm, brewed his own coffee for the first time in years, and spent an unusual amount of time standing at the window, looking out at a city that, for once, didn't feel like it was demanding anything from him. The girls' voices echoed faintly in his memory, Clara's playful defiance, Camille's quiet curiosity, Cody's constant observation. He wasn't used to replaying conversations that didn't involve negotiations, but their words kept surfacing, their faces tugging at him in a way no business proposal ever had. By mid-morning, Lucas arrived at the park. He brought 3 new sketch pads, a small set of washable markers, and a box of lemon cookies he'd learned from Skylar were the girls' favorite. He wasn't trying to buy their affection. He knew better than that. He just wanted to show them he remembered, details, preferences, tiny truths. The kinds of things that made people feel seen. They were already there, sprawled out beneath the tree, deep in a pretend game that involved invisible dragons and a queen who couldn't be defeated unless someone baked her cookies. Lucas watched for a moment before approaching, and the moment they saw him, Cody grinned and waved him over like they'd known him forever. Clara immediately asked if he had brought anything interesting, and Camille simply tugged at his sleeve, guiding him into their makeshift kingdom as though he belonged there without question. They pulled him into their world effortlessly, like gravity. Skylar arrived later, carrying a bag of sandwiches and a folded blanket. She looked tired, but at ease. She greeted Lucas with a small nod and no hesitation. It was clear now, in how she looked at him, that something had shifted, not into full trust, but into quiet recognition that he was becoming part of the rhythm of their lives. That afternoon was different. More than just playing or sitting on the sidelines, Lucas began to participate. He helped build a fort out of blankets and sticks, read them a chapter from a fantasy book, and even let Clara braid a section of his hair using a neon green hair tie. He let them paint his nails with glittery polish that barely washed off later, and when Camille spilled juice all over her shoes, he cleaned them without hesitation. Skylar watched all of it silently, her expression unreadable, but her body language relaxed. She wasn't just tolerating him anymore, she was beginning to accept that he was there for the right reasons. As the day began to wind down, Skylar asked him to walk with her while the girls played nearby. They moved slowly along the edge of the park, and for the first time in a long time, it felt natural. She asked about his life, not about his company, but about his day-to-day. Where he lived. If he had family nearby. Whether he ever got lonely. Lucas answered honestly. He told her how empty his home felt, how strange it was to be surrounded by noise now and not want to escape it. How meeting her again, and seeing the girls, had disrupted everything in the best way. He admitted his fears too. That he didn't know how to do this. That he didn't deserve another chance. But he wanted to try. Skylar stopped walking and looked at him. She told him that forgiveness wasn't a door you could knock on once and expect to be let in. It was something you earned through consistency, through patience. But more than anything, she said, the girls needed to know he wouldn't disappear again. Not next month. Not next year. Not when things got uncomfortable or complicated. Lucas nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't make promises with timelines. Instead, he said the only thing he knew was real. That he wasn't going anywhere. By the time they returned to the girls, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light across the park. Clara and Cody had fallen asleep on the picnic blanket, curled into each other like kittens, and Camille was quietly humming to herself while brushing leaves off their hair. Skylar looked down at them, and without thinking, Lucas knelt to help gather their things. He carried Clara to the car, her head resting against his shoulder, her breath warm and steady. It felt like something sacred. When he handed her to Skylar and buckled Cody into the seat beside her, he didn't feel like a visitor. He felt like someone who had finally started to come home. The following week marked a quiet shift in the unspoken balance between Lucas and the small family he was slowly becoming a part of. He no longer questioned whether he should be present, he simply was. He picked the girls up from school twice, with Skylar's cautious but undeniable permission. The first time he waited outside, unsure of how the teachers or other parents might react, but when the girls spotted him, their squeals and frantic waves erased any doubt. They came running with backpacks bouncing and glitter-covered papers crumpled in their hands, talking over one another to tell him about math quizzes and story time. It wasn't about the content, it was about the trust. They expected him to be there now. And he was. After that, it became easier. Skylar started texting him directly. "Can you take them to the library today? Are you free Saturday for the school picnic? Can you bring Clara's jacket?" At first, the messages were short and practical. But slowly, they softened. One evening, she sent him a picture of the girls asleep in their shared bed, cheeks pressed together, the pearl necklace gently looped over the bedpost. No caption. Just a moment she had chosen to share with him. Lucas stared at it longer than he meant to, heart tangled in ways he couldn't explain. That weekend, Skylar invited him to join them for dinner at their home. It wasn't a big gesture or a dramatic event, it was simply an acknowledgement that he had crossed a threshold. Her apartment was modest but warm, filled with mismatched furniture, art made by little hands on every wall, and the unmistakable energy of 3 children who knew they were loved. Lucas arrived with a lasagna he had asked his driver to pick up from their favorite Italian spot and 3 little journals wrapped in paper, one for each girl. Skylar rolled her eyes at the gifts but didn't send them away. The girls shrieked in excitement, hugging him as if he had brought treasure. They ate at a table barely big enough for 5 people, elbows bumping, forks clinking, juice being spilled and wiped up without drama. It was chaos, and Lucas had never felt more grounded. The conversation drifted from school to dreams to silly jokes, and at one point Cody asked if dragons were real. Before Lucas could answer, Camille said, "Maybe, but I think Daddy would know," and the room went still for a split second. Skylar's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Lucas didn't breathe. And Cody, oblivious to the shift, looked at his sisters and said, "Well, not Daddy. But he kind of feels like one." Lucas didn't speak. He didn't try to explain or correct or define the moment. He just looked at Skylar. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't angry. If anything, it was unreadable, a mixture of hesitation, surprise, and something close to hope. She looked down at her plate, then met his eyes and gave a slow, barely visible nod. After dinner, he helped clean the dishes while the girls danced around the living room, inventing songs and performing for the refrigerator magnets like it was Broadway. Skylar stood beside him at the sink, drying plates, her shoulder brushing his. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was full. Comfortable. Familiar in a way that didn't ask questions or expect resolution. It just was. As he prepared to leave, the girls begged him to stay longer. Clara clung to his leg dramatically, Cody tried to bribe him with half a chocolate chip cookie, and Camille asked if he'd come back tomorrow. He promised them yes. Not with conditions or clauses. Just yes. At the door, Skylar looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't expect this. I didn't expect you to change." Lucas smiled, not triumphant but quiet. "Neither did I." She nodded once, opened the door for him, and as he stepped into the hallway, she added, "Tomorrow's pancake day. Come hungry." And just like that, the door closed, not on him, but with him already part of what waited inside. Sunday morning arrived with the smell of pancakes and something more delicate, belonging. Lucas had barely knocked on the apartment door when Clara opened it, already wearing a paper chef's hat and covered in flour. She pulled him inside without waiting for permission and shouted to her sisters, "He's here." Within seconds, all 3 girls were surrounding him, asking if he liked chocolate chips or blueberries better, if he wanted to flip the pancakes, if he'd brought more stories. It was overwhelming in the best way, a kind of joyful noise he had never known he needed. Skylar was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with one hand and balancing a cup of coffee in the other. She wore an oversized t-shirt and messy bun, and when she looked up and saw him, her face softened in a way that no longer carried hesitation. Lucas greeted her quietly and offered to help. Without words, she passed him the whisk and pointed to the bowl. They moved around the kitchen like they had always done it, each taking the next task without needing to explain. The girls buzzed around them, adding chaos and laughter to the warmth already filling the room. After breakfast, they all crowded onto the couch for what the girls called quiet hour, which wasn't quiet at all. It involved books, crayons, and building small forts out of pillows. Lucas lay back against the cushions while Clara traced shapes on his arm, Camille fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, and Cody kept asking him how many stars there were in the universe. Skylar sat nearby, watching with a look on her face that Lucas couldn't quite name but wanted to memorize. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something more vulnerable, relief, maybe, or trust beginning to settle into something steady. Later that afternoon, Skylar asked if they could talk. She took him out onto the tiny balcony overlooking the street while the girls napped. It wasn't dramatic or confrontational. She simply leaned against the railing and told him about the night she found out she was pregnant. How scared she was. How she wrote him a message she never sent. How she almost did. How part of her wanted to believe he would have stayed. She didn't say it to guilt him, there was no accusation in her voice. It was just a part of her story she had carried alone. Lucas listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he told her that he didn't know what kind of father he could have been 5 years ago, but he knew what kind he wanted to be now. He told her he wasn't perfect, that he didn't have all the answers, but he was certain of one thing, he loved their children. All 3 of them. And not from obligation, but because they were the best part of who he had become. Skylar nodded, quietly wiping a tear from her cheek. They love you too, she said. And they're starting to feel safe with you. Don't give them a reason to doubt that. He promised he wouldn't. That evening, when the girls woke up, they piled into the car and drove together to a nearby hill to watch the sunset. Lucas sat on a blanket with Cody in his lap, Camille leaning against his side, and Clara trying to capture the sky in a drawing. Skylar sat close by, silent, present, and when the sky turned deep orange and the first star appeared, Clara pointed and whispered, "That one's ours." Lucas didn't say anything. He just looked at Skylar and nodded, feeling like something in the universe had finally found its right place. The morning of the girl's 6th birthday arrived with ribbons, balloons, and a buzz of excitement that filled every corner of the small apartment. The night before, Lucas had stayed up helping Skylar hang decorations after the girls had gone to bed, taping handmade streamers to the walls and setting up the dining table with paper crowns and glitter-covered name cards. It wasn't extravagant. There were no expensive cakes flown in or celebrity entertainers, just pancakes with whipped cream, hand-painted signs, and the kind of joy that couldn't be manufactured. For the first time in years, Lucas wasn't waking up to a calendar full of obligations or a list of strategic goals. He was waking up to 3 daughters with birthdays and smiles and endless energy, and the woman he once lost who now stood beside him with sleepy eyes and a quiet grin. The girls tumbled out of their bedroom in a blur of pajamas and excitement, shouting in unison, "It's today." Clara spotted the presents first and launched toward them, while Camille carefully inspected the decorations, and Cody immediately grabbed a party hat and placed it squarely on Lucas's head. "You're part of the team now," she said, matter-of-factly. "You have to wear it." He wore it all morning, even when it slid sideways or made his hair stick up, because her tone left no room for debate and her smile left no room for anything else. Friends from school arrived later, filling the space with even more noise and laughter. Lucas helped Skylar hand out slices of cake and juice boxes, watched as the girls tore open presents and proudly showed him every gift like he was already there forever. He noticed how the other parents looked at him, not with suspicion, but curiosity. He knew the questions would come. Who is he? Where did he come from? Why is he here now? But he didn't flinch. He belonged in this room. In this life. And he would keep earning it every single day. After the guests left and the apartment quieted, Skylar brought out one last box. It wasn't wrapped in shiny paper, just tied with twine. Inside were 3 matching lockets, one for each girl, with a tiny pearl tucked inside and their initials engraved on the front. When they opened them, their eyes widened, and they looked from the lockets to Lucas, then to Skylar. "These are from all of us," Skylar said softly. "From our family." None of the girls spoke. They just nodded, clutching the lockets like they held something too big for words. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the apartment had fallen into a peaceful hush, Lucas and Skylar sat on the couch surrounded by streamers and cupcake crumbs. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he reached for her hand without asking. They didn't talk about the past or the pain that had shaped so much of their journey. They talked about school pickups and bedtime books and the fact that Clara wanted a telescope even though she was afraid of the dark. They talked about how far they'd come, and how far they still had to go. But mostly, they talked like people who had stopped waiting for the perfect moment and finally chosen to live inside the one they had. Before leaving for the night, Lucas walked into the girls' room one last time. He kissed each of them on the forehead, whispering quiet promises. Not grand ones, but small, real ones. "I'll see you in the morning. I'll be there after school. I'll help you build your dragon." They murmured in their sleep, shifting beneath their blankets, lockets shining faintly on their nightstands. As he stepped out into the hallway, Skylar followed him. She stood in the doorway barefoot, arms folded but relaxed. "You were good today," she said. They didn't stop smiling. Lucas looked at her, heart full and steady. "Neither did I." She nodded slowly, then said something he never expected but had hoped to hear for a long time. "I'm glad you came back." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He stepped forward and kissed her, gently, like a promise sealed not in words but in time. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, filled with sleeping children, soft laughter, and the smell of leftover birthday cake, everything that had once been lost had finally come home.